Okay, so thank you so much for joining us for this food safety talk. My name is Jessica Mollet, and I'm a nutritionist, and we have with us Sue Estridge, and she is at Madison County Cooperative Extension. She is the Food and Consumer Sciences agent, has been there for over 30 years, so has a wealth of information. I am just new at this, and so if you have any questions, feel free to enter them into the chat box, and Sue will be responding to questions. If we can't get to them right away, then we can get them to you afterwards. And I want to thank also Billy in the library for allowing us to do this presentation as well. So the idea of doing a food safety workshop came about because of the pandemic and so many people at home who are cooking more than they ever have before. I had a friend on Facebook at the beginning of the pandemic telling everybody, help, I'm starving. She was kind of joking, but at the same time not, because she just was so used to eating out, at least like a meal a day or so. And so I know so many people are at home cooking, and for many people, this is not something they had done a lot. And so they just wanted to, people want to know, how can I keep myself safe and my family safe? And so this, doing this presentation came about for those reasons. So let me go ahead and get started. Okay. So when you think of safe food, what do you think of in particular? And this is just a terrible picture of a burger. I hope that after this presentation, when you see a burger, you don't get reminded of this picture, but safe food, just take a moment to kind of think about what that means to you. So in general, safe foods are free from disease-causing microbes, from poisonous chemicals or other harmful substances. If you've ever experienced a foodborne illness, you'll know the symptoms can include diarrhea and cramping, but it can also include more severe and life-threatening symptoms. There are more than 250 different foodborne diseases, most of which are caused by bacteria, viruses, and parasites. And you can help keep your family safe from foodborne illnesses by following these 4 simple steps: properly cleaning, properly separating foods, properly cooking foods, and properly chilling them. So I'm just going to ask you a series of questions, and we aren't going to answer them right now. We'll answer them at the end when probably you have more information that you'd be able to answer these questions. So the first one is, myth or fact, foodborne illness affects 1 in 6 North Carolinians annually. Myth or fact, locally produced food is safer than what can be purchased through grocery stores. Myth or fact, more people get sick from chicken than other foods. Myth or fact, burgers are safe if all the pink is gone. Myth or fact, imported foods are the source of most food safety problems. Myth or fact, pressure canning green beans is the only way to can them safely. And myth or fact, food can be risk-free. Okay, so that first question, how many people do you think get sick every year from food? Well, in fact, an estimated 1 in 6 Americans will get sick from food poisoning this year alone. Food poisoning not only sends 128,000 Americans to the hospital each year, it can also cause long-term health problems. And as I mentioned, you can help keep your family safe from food poisoning at home by following the 4 simple steps of cleaning, separating, cooking, and properly chilling. So we'll start with talking about cleaning. Germs that can make you sick can survive in many places around your kitchen, including your food, your hands, utensils, cutting boards, and countertops. Now, hand washing is something we've heard a lot about over the past 12 months. And so probably a lot of this is a review, but it's just as important to remind yourself that you're washing your hands the right way. Use plain soap and water. You can skip the antibacterial soap and scrub the backs of your hands, between your fingers and under your nails for at least 20 seconds. If you need a timer, you can hum the happy birthday song twice from beginning to end. Then you'll rinse the hands and wash them dry with a clean towel. Wash your hands often, especially during times when germs can spread, such as before and or after eating, preparing food, handling raw meat, poultry, seafood, uncooked eggs, using the bathroom, changing diapers, touching an animal or animal feed, and touching the garbage, treating a cut or wound, caring for someone who is sick, or blowing your nose, coughing, or sneezing. Now, these, again, like I said, are probably review, but it's just important to remember because this is really essential. Also, wash surfaces and utensils after each use. Wash cutting boards, dishes, utensils, and countertops with hot soapy water, especially after they've held raw meat, poultry, seafood, or eggs. Wash dishcloths often in the hot cycle of your washing machine. And there are safe ways to handle and clean fresh produce before eating them. Make sure that you cut away any damaged or bruised areas and rinse fresh fruits and vegetables under cold running tap water. Dry with a paper towel or clean cloth towel. Do not wash produce with soap, bleach, sanitizer, alcohol, disinfectant, or any other chemical. Produce is porous, so soap and other disinfectants may be absorbed by fruits and vegetables, even with thorough rinsing. Salt, vinegar, lemon, and lime juice have not been shown to be effective at removing germs on produce. And produce is labeled as quote unquote pre-washed, does not need to be washed again. So the first time I saw this presentation was with Sue, and I was just so surprised about this part, that you should not wash chicken, poultry, chicken, meat, or seafood. Because when you wash them in the sink, the water pressure from the faucet causes bacteria on the surface of the chicken or any other raw animal food like meat or seafood to splatter across your kitchen, including on surfaces and foods nearby. Rinsing your chicken in the sink is an example of what's called cross-contamination. So when you take a look at this picture, it's just amazing to think about how far all these bits of bacteria can spread in your kitchen.
Jessica, oh, sorry.
Go ahead. Please.
I thought you were, okay. I wanted to make reference to this. So,
please.
I think that, a lot of our, our food safety behaviors come from how we were raised. And when I moved to Madison County, I noticed that people wash their poultry. They go to Ingalls or wherever, come back, and they're getting ready to prepare chicken, and they wash it. And that was foreign to me because I wasn't raised that way.
Right.
And so what I think it goes back to is because I, without going into all kinds of, my daughter raised some chickens for her wedding reception, and we went through a chicken killing with her in-laws.
Yes.
And I thought, okay, this is where this comes from, because they have to wash the chickens. So okay. I think these food behaviors, they come from something. So when I'm teaching classes and I tell people, we don't recommend washing your chicken, they look at me like I have horns growing out of my head. Right. And then I say, well, why do you wash your chicken? Why do you wash your poultry? And they went, well, my mama did it. And my grandmama did it. And that's because probably they did do it. But it was back when they were, killing the chickens on their property. And, but anyway, I wanted to put that in there because I thought that in Madison County, especially, it's one thing that people have a hard time, readjusting to. And I tell people, if you must wash your chicken, if you have to wash it, just make sure you sanitize really well with a quart of water and about, 3 teaspoons of bleach, and spray well all around the kitchen, close to where the sink is, to kind of, kill campylobacteriosis, because that's the the bacteria of concern.
Yeah. I think as you were mentioning that, I was thinking about where I've seen people wash food is seafood, but it would be outside of this outdoor sink, kind of away from the house a little bit, or it could even be like after taking it off the boat. So it's not inside the house and getting all over things inside the house. And so I could see how some people have translated, washing their seafood after they bring it off of the out of the water.
Right.
Washing it in their kitchen, which is a totally different thing because it could really spread that bacteria everywhere.
Yeah, so we all grow up with a way of, we all have, like growing up, I didn't wash my hands a lot. I mean,
Right.
I was in the mud a lot. I mean, I don't remember that being, I washed my hands, but it wasn't like how it's kind of, stressed to us now, but it was just how we were raised.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Good point. So moving on to this next concept about separating foods. And so bacteria can be transferred from one food to another, as I mentioned, but this is called cross-contamination. So how can cross-contamination happen? Well, it could begin at the grocery store. In your shopping cart, be sure to separate raw meat, poultry, seafood, and eggs from other foods. You'll place packages of raw meat, poultry, and seafood in plastic bags if available. And this is usually what the bagger does, but when you're checking out, you can place raw meat, poultry, and seafood in separate bags from other foods to keep from cross-contamination. Cutting boards and plates. So use a separate cutting board and plates for produce versus meat, poultry, seafood, and eggs. And I see this cross-contamination happen a lot. I've seen it in our house when taking something out to the grill, for instance, and kind of putting it on a plate, and then coming back in and on that plate, maybe cutting up onions or something. And so that's an example of cross-contamination that can happen. So you definitely want to use separate cutting boards and then replace them when they're worn, because when your cutting boards get worn, they get these little divots in them, and that's where bacteria can reside. And use hot soapy water to thoroughly wash plates, utensils, and cutting boards that touch raw meat, poultry, seafood, eggs, or flour. And so I don't know if do you have anything more about that?
Well, that's great. I know that some people will actually color code, and they'll have like a green cutting board that's specifically for produce, and then maybe, I don't know, a blue cutting board for raw meat. And that just helps them to kind of, separate those two. But you don't have to do that, as long as you just, really thoroughly wash those cutting boards. You're fine. And there's a lot of debate out there between which cutting board is better, plastic or wood. The main thing is that washing them thoroughly, and then even if you're still a little concerned, you could always spray with a sanitizing solution of, as I said earlier, I make my own sanitizing solution. I keep it under my sink, and it's a quart of water with 3 teaspoons of liquid bleach. And so when I'm like feeling like, I don't know if I got this clean enough, you got to wash it first. Yeah. And washing is not sanitizing. Washing is getting the dirt off and the extra yuckies off. Sanitizing comes in and it just reduces and kills off those extra pathogens. So when in doubt, you could always spray your cutting boards with a quick spray of a sanitizer and just let it dissipate. You don't even have to wash it off. Just let it kind of, air dry, and you should be fine. Okay,
that's good points. Thank you. And think also about how you separate your foods in the refrigerator. You want to make sure you don't mix fruits and vegetables with meats and seafood, for instance, in the same crisper due to cross-contamination. And something interesting that I had not known before, learning about this from Sue, was that ethylene is given off by some fruits, and that can spoil some vegetables as well. So ethylene is given off by apples and peaches and pears, and also by potatoes. You want to make sure that you store, any raw meats and seafood, chicken on the bottom shelf to prevent it from dripping down and contaminating food on lower shelves. And if you're not going to eat those raw meats, be sure to freeze them instead if you're not going to eat them within a couple of days. You want to make sure that you don't put your perishables like eggs and butter in the door. And that's because, the warmest part of the refrigerator really is the door, because it's opening and closing so much. And of course, the door oftentimes has a specific place to put your eggs or your butter, but you really want to put that, inside the cooler part of the refrigerator, not inside the doors. And you want to make sure that your fruits and vegetables that you put in the refrigerator are never wet. So if you're washing them, before you want to put them in the fridge, just make sure that they're completely dry. Anything else, Sue, that you can think about here?
I'm sorry if there's some background noise. I've got the lawnmower going out there, but one thing I think people need to realize is that, tomatoes, this is not a food safety comment, but more of a make your tomatoes taste good kind of comment. They do not need to be refrigerated when you get them home from the grocery store. When you cut the tomato, then you can put it in a Ziploc bag or, a saran wrap and put it in the fridge. But if you put your tomatoes in the refrigerator when you get home from the grocery store, they're not going to like it at all.
Yeah, good point. For pantry storage, make sure that you're storing things that are 6 inches off the floor and they're in pest-proof containers. And of course, not under any water lines because they could leak, and then you'd have to get rid of a lot of food. And then also, you don't want to store chemicals, cleaners or sanitizers, with your dry goods because, maybe you're out spraying Windex on some windows, and then you come in and put your Windex into the pantry storage, and then it drips down onto some other foods. And so you just don't want to include, chemicals with your stored food. We're going to move on to the next segment about how to, about cooking your food to the right temperature. And what we have here is a picture of a digital thermometer, and it's taking the temperature of a piece of meat, and it says 128 degrees. That means that this meat needs to continue to be cooked because that is too low, and you'll learn about that in a moment. So why do we cook our food? Why don't we just eat our meat raw? Well, there's many reasons for that. A lot of people like the flavor, smoky flavor of meat, the texture of it. Can you imagine eating a steak raw? How much that would, energy that would take to have to do that? So it really helps with digestion, with preservation, and safety, which is what this talk is about. Heat kills harmful microorganisms, and that allows us to enjoy our food without getting sick. So there's a lot of different strains of E. coli, but some are more dangerous than others. Specifically, E. coli 0157H7 can have serious consequences from cramps and diarrhea to even kidney failure. So eating contaminated food is the most common way to get an E. coli infection. When it comes to ground beef, we can minimize the risk of E. coli by cooking ground beef to 155 degrees for 15 seconds or 160 degrees for an instant kill. The safe internal cooking temperature for steaks and roasts is 145 degrees, but for ground beef, it's 160 degrees. And so why is that? These all come from the same animal, different parts, and it's processed in different ways. But the reason why is that when meat is ground, part of the meat that was exposed to the outside environment ends up on the inside of the patty. Also, ground beef burger patties are often made up of meat from several different animals. These factors increase the risk that the inside of the burger could be contaminated with E. coli. A steak or roast is far less likely to be contaminated inside because it is intact and comes from one animal. So the cooking temperature is lower for these than for ground meat. You can't tell if food is cooked just by looking at it. Use a thermometer to check the internal temperature. And when checking the temperature, insert a clean, sanitized probe into the center of the thickest part of the food. Stir liquid foods before measuring just to ensure even temperature, and continue to cook if the correct temperature is not obtained. So for instance, looking at this burger patty, what do you think? Is this ground beef hamburger done? Yes, surprisingly. Even though it is still pink, it has reached 160 degrees Fahrenheit. Ground beef can be pink, red, or gray, brown at a safe temperature. Being pink after reaching 160 degrees Fahrenheit is related to the pH, the concentration of pigment in the meat, and the amount of fat. What about this one? Well, this one is not done yet. It looks brown, but the temperature is only 135 degrees Fahrenheit. It can turn brown before reaching 160 if the meat was ground from the carcass of an older animal, if it was stored for long periods of time, if it was stored above proper temperatures, or is exposed to too much air. 1 out of every 4 hamburgers turns brown before it reaches a safe internal temperature. A lot of us use microwaves and microwave our food. You just need to make sure that microwave food is cooked thoroughly. Read the package directions for cooking and follow them exactly to make sure food is thoroughly cooked. If the food label says, let it stand for instance, 5 minutes after cooking, follow the directions, because letting microwave food sit for a few minutes allows food to cook thoroughly as the colder areas absorb heat from hotter areas. And stir the food in the middle of heating if it's a liquidy kind of food. However, for commercially prepared frozen food, follow the package directions because some are not designed to be stirred while heating. And make sure that you keep your food hot after cooking at 140 degrees or above. If you're not serving food right after cooking, keep it out of that temperature danger zone. And the temperature danger zone is between 40 and 140 degrees. This is where germs grow rapidly. So use a heating source like a warming tray or a slow cooker. And finally, refrigerate and freeze your food properly. Refrigerate perishable foods within 2 hours. These include, your perishables are your dairy, seafood, meat, poultry, eggs, and even raw sprouts. Cooked or cut fruits and vegetables, cooked rice pasta or potatoes, and soy protein. Bacteria that cause food poisoning multiply the quickest between 40 and 140 degrees Fahrenheit. The temperature danger zone. Your refrigerator should be set to 40 degrees Fahrenheit or below, and your freezer to 0 degrees or below. Never leave perishable foods out of the refrigerator for more than 2 hours. And if the food is exposed to temperatures above 90 degrees Fahrenheit, like in a hot car or a summer picnic, be sure to refrigerate it within 1 hour. Leftovers need to be placed in shallow containers and refrigerated promptly to allow quick cooling. And never thaw or marinate foods on the counter. That's one that we have done so many times, but really the safest way is in the refrigerator to marinate and to thaw. Freezing, by the way, does not destroy necessarily harmful germs, but it does keep the food safe until you can cook it. Know when to throw out food by checking foodsafety.gov. So the temperature danger zone, which I just mentioned, be sure to keep perishables out of that temperature danger zone. Those are, remember, the dairy, the seafood, the raw sprouts also. And bacteria grows most rapidly in between 40 and 140, doubling in number in as little as 2 minutes, 20 minutes. So you can imagine within 2 hours how much bacteria, how much more bacteria you had than you did 2 hours previous. So it really has to be refrigerated within 2 hours. This is why perishable food should be kept cold while in transit and storage to limit the growth of harmful bacteria. So eggs and salmonella, I've had a lot of questions about this. It's kind of fascinating. A lot of things I didn't know before I was doing some research on this. Eggs are, of course, one of nature's most nutritious and economical foods, but it's important that you take care when handling and preparing fresh eggs and egg products. The inside of eggs can contain a germ called salmonella that can make you sick, especially if you eat raw or lightly cooked eggs. The outside of egg shells may become contaminated with salmonella from poultry droppings or the area where the eggs are laid. However, eggs are safe when properly handled and cooked. How can I kind of reduce my chances of getting salmonella? Well, keep the eggs refrigerated at 40 degrees or colder, and buy eggs from suppliers that keep them refrigerated. Discard cracked or dirty eggs. You can cook eggs until both the yolk and the white are firm. And that is in general to an internal temperature of 160 degrees or hotter. Make sure that foods that contain raw or lightly cooked eggs, like hollandaise sauce or eggnog, are made only with pasteurized eggs. And eat or refrigerate eggs and foods containing eggs promptly after cooking. Do not keep eggs or foods made with eggs at room temperature for more than 2 hours or 1 hour if the temperature is 90 degrees or hotter. Wash hands and items that come in contact with raw eggs. And this is a hard one for me, is do not taste or eat raw dough or batter, such as cookie dough and cake mix made with raw eggs. Bake or cook raw dough and batter before eating. So Sue, what do you think about this? Because there are a lot of people who, we get fresh eggs from people. And so I know there's a lot of people who will keep eggs out on the counter, particularly when you kind of come into places like Madison County, a little more rural areas. What are your thoughts about that?
I think that as long as they're not washed,
Okay.
Because when you wash them, it takes away the protective barrier. I love farm fresh eggs, and my sister's coming this weekend and she's bringing some. So once you wash them, and I don't really understand all of this, but then you take away the protectiveness of it. So if you get farm fresh eggs, just don't wash them. I mean, wash them before you use them. But while they're on the counter, leave them be, and they're fine.
Okay, that's good. That's good to know. So foods to refrigerate. Think again about perishable foods, milk and milk products like butter and yogurt and cheese, except hard cheeses. Think about where you find Parmesan cheese. Usually it's not in the refrigerated area, usually at the grocery store. Some countries don't refrigerate eggs, but as Sue mentioned, as long as you're not washing them, they kind of have that protective coating, and you should be fine. Meat, poultry, fish, and shellfish need to be refrigerated. Cooked foods like vegetables, rice, and potatoes. And once you slice or cut fruits and vegetables, cutting produce allows microorganisms to get inside and contaminate the flesh. So you'll need to refrigerate them after they've been cut. And most vegetables will, of course, last longer when they're chilled. Corn on the cob, this was fascinating to me. After 6 hours at room temperature, the sugar content of corn decreases by 40%. So oftentimes if people really like sweet corn, which is oftentimes the reason why people like corn, then you'll want to also refrigerate that. Because berries spoil so quickly, and we're talking about soft berries like blueberries and grapes and strawberries and raspberries in particular, gosh, it doesn't seem like they last even a couple of days. You'll want to refrigerate those. Jellies, once they've been opened, just to prevent the growth of mold and yeast. And this was new to me, natural peanut butter and nuts, if you don't tend to finish them within a month, in warm temperatures, the oil in nuts can go rancid quickly. Anything more that you can think about with that, Sue?
No, I think you covered it well.
Okay. And this is interesting to me, the foods that do not have to be refrigerated. So most fruits can be left out on the counter to ripen. However, once they're perfectly ripe, you put them in the refrigerator to have them extend their usefulness a little longer. Now, garlic and onions, but not scallions, still in their skins, you can store them, outside of the refrigerator on the counter. But, and this is something that finally explains to me why my onions keep sprouting, is you don't want to store onions and potatoes together, because potatoes also emit some ethylene, and that just causes other produce to ripen more quickly and can cause, like what I have on my kitchen table right now, probably 3 or 4 onions that have a sprout coming out the top of them. And that's because I always put them in with the potatoes. I just didn't know. Potatoes and sweet potatoes should not be refrigerated, because refrigeration will convert the starch of them to an unpleasant sweet taste. I've not tasted that before, but from what I've read, it's very unpleasant. And tomatoes, as Sue mentioned, lose their flavor when they're chilled. And winter squash and that's the squash that has a hard shell, like a butternut squash, can also be kept out of the refrigerator. So about expiration dates, according to the USDA, if the date passes during home storage, a product should still be safe and wholesome if handled properly until the time that spoilage is evident. Common signs of spoilage include an off odor, a flavor, or texture due to naturally occurring spoilage bacteria. Of course, mold is also an indicator, but sometimes even the sight or sniff test isn't enough to determine whether or not food has gone bad. Refer to just general guidelines from the USDA on when it's time to toss and when it's not. So I'm going to turn this part over to Sue about processing or canning foods, because they can also be a high-risk product. Do you want to talk a little bit about the acidic foods versus the non-acidic, like green beans and potatoes, that sort of thing?
Sure. So basically, when you're, I'm going to shut this window, I'm sorry.
That's fine. I know I had to do that too in my house.
Got someone outside of weed eating. So when we're thinking about canning, we've got to think about 2 ways to can our food. We have the hot water bath and we have the pressure canner, and there's a big difference between the two. So the hot water bath is for foods that are considered high acidic. Think tomatoes, fruits, jams and jellies and things like that. You can safely can those foods in a hot water bath. But when you have low acid foods like green beans, vegetables, meats, you must use a pressure canner, because a pressure canner can reach a temperature of 240 degrees under pressure that will kill Clostridium botulism, the spores. That can't be done. So when you're doing, let's say you're going to do green beans and you're going to hot water bath them, you're only going to get up to 212 degrees. That will not kill botulism. It won't do it. You've got to do it under pressure. So your low acid foods would be anything like your meats, your vegetables need to be under a pressure canner. Everything else, fruits, vegetables, I'm sorry, not vegetables, fruits, jams, jellies, your pickles. Now pickles, when your pickles are, you think about a cucumber, that's considered a low acid vegetables, but you acidify that. You change that whole pH by acidification with the vinegar. So that can be safely processed in a hot water bath. If anybody has any questions about, I'm getting ready to teach I've got a hands-on class coming up in May that's free of charge. And if anybody's interested in that, they can contact me, but it will be in Yancey County. But then in June, I'm going to do a series in Madison County, and we'll cover dehydration, low acid canning, pressure canning, jams, jellies, freezing, and fermentation.
Wow. Oh, that's great. And there's also something that people need to know about the differences when with pressure canning when you're at different altitudes too, right? And I don't know if that's also the case for us in Madison County because we're above 2,000.
It is. That's a good point. Thanks for bringing that up. So we are like in Madison County, we're at about 1,800 to about 5,000. It just depends on where you are.
Okay.
So that when you're at higher elevation, you got to adjust that time. So you're going to have to pressure a little bit longer. So the thing to do, so if you're going to pressure can or hot water bath at a higher altitude, because the Ball Blue book, so easy to preserve, they are giving you directions for at sea level.
Okay.
But within those books, if you're going to a reputable food preservation resource and with extension, we can only recommend those that have been research based. So there's the Ball Blue book, there's So Easy to Preserve, there's the USDA guide to canning. And if you want, and I have a reference sheet of those resources. If you wanted to contact me, I could give you. If you just, follow the directions within those trustworthy resources, there's a section that will say, how to adjust for altitude. If you just follow those directions, you'll be fine.
Okay.
If you have questions, you can contact me. I can help you with that. Where I am at my home, where I am right now, I think I'm at like 2,400. So I have to adjust whenever I can, because I'm not at zero. I'm at, I'm a little higher. So I have to adjust when I can.
And I know I remember seeing this maybe on y'all's Facebook page too, that y'all also offer dial gauge checking.
We
too.
do. And
Yeah.
so if you have a dial gauge canner, this is for pressure canning, not you don't need it for hot water bath, but if you have a dial gauge canner, not a weighted gauge canners never need to be tested.
Okay.
Weighted gauge canners are it's more of a you can hear it jingle or rock. It's more of a hearing thing. I'm a visual person.
Yeah.
So my canners have a dial gauge, looks like a clock, and they have to be tested yearly to make sure that they're working properly. And I offer free dial gauge canner testing. All you have to do is contact me. It takes less than 30 seconds, well, about a minute to test your dial gauge. And all you need to bring to me is your lid. You don't have to bring the canner, just the lid. And then I've got this tester, and I can test it to see, if it's safe.
Good. Okay. And I thought this was interesting. And you mentioned how like potatoes are low acid food. Is in 2015 in Ohio, one person died and 24 others got botulism from potatoes that weren't canned properly. They were used to make a potato salad served at a church potluck. The potatoes are low acid food, and the wrong method of boiling water bath instead of a pressure canner was used to can them. So it's, it's very serious. It can be very serious if we use the wrong kind of canning.
That was so totally preventable if they would have just followed a reliable resource, and they probably hot water bath the potatoes.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, they are low acid, and they did not reach that 240 degrees to kill botulinum. And so it was very unfortunate.
Yeah, it is. So we're returning to those questions that I asked at the beginning of the presentation. So fact or myth, foodborne illness affects 1 in 6 North Carolinians. And this is a fact. The CDC estimates that 48 million cases of foodborne illness occur nationally every year. And myth or fact, locally produced food is safer than what can be purchased through grocery stores. This is actually a myth because bacteria and viruses don't focus on location or size of a food company or farm. So while control measures may be less complicated to put in place for a small operation, there's no data that suggests location or size matter when it comes to final food product contamination rates. This always, I think, is tricky. More people get sick from chicken than other foods. And that is a myth because fresh produce is linked to more foodborne illness outbreaks than any other food category because they may come in contact with multiple contamination sources and aren't cooked. They are high risk for foodborne illness. The CDC actually looked at 4,600 outbreaks to estimate the number of illnesses attributed to each of 17 food categories, and produce caused nearly half of all illnesses. Many of these were due to the norovirus. Over half of norovirus infections were caused by ill food handlers and often during preparation and service. Hopefully you know this one now, though you may have been shocked during when we were doing the presentation. I remember being shocked about this. Myth or fact, burgers are safe if all the pink is gone, and that is a myth. Color is not an indicator of safety. The only way to ensure that food has been cooked for safety is to use a thermometer to measure temperatures. 1 out of every 4 hamburgers turns brown before it reaches a safe internal temperature. Myth or fact, imported foods are the source of most food safety problems. And this is a myth. There have been many high-profile foodborne illness outbreaks linked to both domestic and imported food. However, the data shows that the risk of getting a foodborne illness is still greater for domestically produced foods compared to imported foods based on the number of outbreaks reported. And myth or fact, pressure canning green beans is the only way to can them safely. Definitely a fact. Boiling water baths will not get hot enough to inactivate Clostridium botulinum spores. Clostridium botulinum spores, although found on most fresh foods, are harmless on these foods, but they grow rapidly in moist, low-acid environments with little or no oxygen present, in temperatures between 40 and 120 degrees Fahrenheit. So under these conditions, spores can produce a deadly toxin that can cause GI, gastrointestinal distress, severe neurological damage, and as we heard with the potatoes, even death. And this one I think is kind of a trick question, but myth or fact, food can be totally risk-free. And that is a myth. All food safety practices are focused on reducing, not eliminating risks. Chances of contamination, regardless of how small, are always there. Despite all the precautions that are put in place to make our food safe, there is always at least a small risk of getting sick from any food. So that kind of concludes the presentation portion. Sue, do you have anything else to kind of add to this?
No, I think you've done a great job covering all the basics of basic food safety, consumer food safety. But you know, folks can always contact me with any questions regarding food safety. I'm happy to you know, help you in any way. I get lots of phone calls from folks, and I don't rely on, you know, on me. I rely on the research out there. So Billy has my contact information, I'm sure, but if not, it's sue_estridge@ncsu.edu.
Great. And this is going to be available online with the Madison County Public Library YouTube channel. That's correct, Billy?
That is correct.
Great.
And I just want to thank Jessica and Sue today for a wonderful presentation. I was shocked about some of that stuff as well.
Yeah, good.
But thank you both so much.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Billy.
Thank you.
Thanks, both of you.